If you've ever stared out a plane window and felt like the world below was trying to forget you, try doing it in a helicopter flying over the Alaskan deadlands. The blades roared overhead, chopping through wind so cold it might have been carved from glass. I sat crammed in the back seat of the chopper, hugging my backpack like it could save me, staring out into a world of white that didn't end. Snow covered everything. Mountains, pines, what might have once been rivers. But now it was all frozen, all silent, all watching. No signs of life. No roads. No cabins. Not even an aircraft trail above us. Just pure, brutal nothingness. The pilot, a guy named Briggs, hadn't said more than 3 words since takeoff. He didn't smile. Didn't joke. When I asked questions, he just gave a nod or tapped the fuel gauge like that was all I needed to know. There was a weight in the air, like we weren't just flying into cold, but into something old, something waiting. I pressed my face to the window, eyes burning from dryness, and finally caught sight of the facility Houseion station. It looked like someone had dropped a handful of silver boxes in the middle of an Arctic graveyard. Metal buildings, tall antennas, wind fences. Nothing moved. No smoke from vents. No lights. Just the station, sitting there like a dead thing refusing to sink. Briggs circled once, then dipped low. The landing wasn't rough, but it rattled my bones. The moment the doors opened, cold stabbed through my jacket like it had teeth. I stepped out, boots crunching on a thick crust of ice, my breath fogging in front of me like ghost sighs. This wasn't just isolation. This was exile. I'd agreed to 6 months of winter duty in the name of scientific work and a decent paycheck. But deep down, I think a part of me wanted to disappear. And standing there, staring at the frozen station through sheets of wind and snow, I realized something I wouldn't admit for weeks. I hadn't come here to escape the world. I'd come here to vanish from it. They say people don't end up in places like this by accident. You don't take a contract at the edge of the world unless you're running from something. I wasn't just running. I was erasing myself. My name is Silas Thorne, former weather analyst, mid-level no-AA researcher, recently divorced and deeply expendable. When the email came offering 6 months of isolation, triple pay, and complete solitude for self-reflection, I didn't hesitate. I didn't even read the fine print. I just said yes. There's something clean about leaving everything behind. No bills, no phone service, no reminders of the people who used to need you. Just snow. And silence. And something in the silence that feels like it's listening. My last real memory before arriving was the hotel coffee at Anchorage Airport. Burnt, bitter, comforting in its cheapness. Everything after that became noise, the chopper, the endless wind, the blank page waiting to be filled. As we walked toward the station, I caught my reflection in one of the metal panels. I looked like someone who didn't want to be found. Hair too long, eyes too hollow, shoulders hunched not from cold, but from carrying too many endings. I told myself this was a job, just a seasonal gig. But deep down I knew I didn't come here to work. I came here to disappear quietly, like fog burned off by morning light. But Houseion doesn't let you vanish. It watches. It remembers. It brings back what you tried to bury. I didn't know it then, but my arrival wasn't the beginning of a work assignment. It was the start of something older waking up. And it had been waiting a long time for someone like me. If this place doesn't kill you with cold, it'll hollow you out until you forget who you were. And when that happens, you start hearing things that sound like memory but aren't. You start wondering if the face in the mirror is yours, or just wearing it. He was already standing outside when I stepped off the chopper. A tall figure in a thick navy parka, gray beard frosted at the edges, hands buried deep in his coat pockets. He didn't wave, didn't smile, He just stood there like he'd been expecting me, not like someone who'd read my file, but like someone who'd seen me in a dream. "You must be Silas Thorne," he said. Voice gravelly, emotionless. "Welcome to Houseion Station." We shook hands. His grip was firm, but his fingers felt like polished stone, too cold, too still. He introduced himself as Dr. Aldrich Voss, lead atmospheric researcher, on-site medical liaison, and the last remaining senior staff member. The others, he said, had all cycled out over the years. Some never finished their terms. He didn't explain why. He never did. The walk to the main building was maybe 40 yards, but it felt like crossing into another dimension. Wind howled. Snow stung my cheeks, and the sky pressed down like a lid. As the doors shut behind us, the cold stayed outside, but something else came in with us. Something I couldn't name. Inside was dim, sterile, humming with the quiet rhythm of machinery. Weather monitors, old computers, paper maps pinned to corkboards. Photos of past crews lined the walls, men and women smiling in front of this same station in brighter years. But every frame had been coated in a thin veil of dust, like the joy inside them had expired. Dr. Voss gave a brief tour, said little. He walked ahead like a shadow, with a destination I hadn't earned. When we reached my quarters, he stopped and turned. "There are things here," he said, voice low. "You'll need to follow the protocols. All of them." Then he handed me a notebook leather-bound, cracked at the spine, and left without another word. That was the last thing he said to me that day. But I remember how he looked at me before he walked away. Like he knew I wouldn't be the same man 6 months from now. Like I'd already started to fade. The notebook Dr. Voss handed me didn't feel like something new employees were supposed to get. It wasn't printed by any government agency. No logos. No official forms. Just a worn leather cover. Edges curled like it had been clutched too hard. Too often. Faded ink across the front read, "Protocol for Prolonged Darkness." The way he said it, protocol felt off. Too reverent. Like he was handing me scripture, not science. I sat on the cot in my room, the heat barely warming the space, the single window already frosting over. I opened the book. The first page was handwritten, messy, almost frantic. Some lines were crossed out and rewritten. Others had been underlined over and over like the ink was trying to scream. Rule 1. Never open the roof hatch, no matter what you hear above. Rule 2. If the radios emit static followed by whispering, unplug them immediately. Rule 3. When the lights flicker, close your eyes until they stabilize. Rule 4. Do not respond to knocks unless you see your own face in the peephole, and even then, be certain it's yours. Rule 5. Between 3:00 and 3:33 a.m., do not leave your room, even if the alarm sounds. Rule 6. If you see someone walking outside in the snow, do not shine your flashlight on them. Rule 7. Leave food at the entrance each night. Don't ask why. Don't eat it yourself. At first, I laughed under my breath. It had to be a prank. Some weird tradition to haze the new guy. But the way the ink trembled, the way certain words were nearly carved into the page, it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like a warning written by someone who didn't make it out. There's a difference between instructions and confessions. That notebook. It read like both. I should have put it down. I should have thrown it into the furnace and forgotten every word. But that night, when the first knock came, the only thing between me and whatever was on the other side was that rule book. That first night, I tried to sleep, but the walls wouldn't let me. The station creaked and sighed like something inside it was stretching. Pipes popped. Vents hummed. The kind of noises you can write off when you're in a city. But out here, in absolute isolation, every sound feels personal. Every sound feels like it's meant for you. I kept the notebook beside my bed like a loaded weapon. The rules glared at me in the dim yellow light, and though part of me still clung to the idea this was a psychological exercise or some onboarding tradition, another part of me, the quieter, older part, believed every word. When the heater kicked in around midnight, it did little to help. The air stayed frigid, heavy with the kind of chill that doesn't just bite your skin, it sinks into your bones and waits. I pulled my blanket tighter, but it wasn't enough. I wasn't shivering from cold anymore. I was shivering from anticipation. At 1:12 a.m., the lights buzzed overhead. Just a flicker. Just a breath of hesitation. I held still. My eyes darted to the rule book, to Rule 3. Close your eyes when they flicker. But they didn't go out. Not yet. I checked the hallway through the peephole. No one. Nothing. But the silence felt wrong, not empty, but loaded. Like the stillness just before glass breaks. Back in the control room, I sat alone with the monitors. Snow kept falling, blanketing the world in static. No movement. No wind. It looked peaceful. But it wasn't. I watched for hours, waiting for something I couldn't name. And slowly, I began to understand something I still can't explain. The cold here doesn't come from outside. It comes from the building itself. From the steel, from the floor, from somewhere beneath. And that chill. It wasn't weather. It was memory. I started my first night shift like a skeptic. Just me, a cup of cheap coffee, and the low hum of the control room monitors. Dr. Voss had already retired to his quarters. He didn't say goodnight. He didn't have to. The silence said enough. Outside, the cameras showed a static world, snow falling in slow motion, wind cutting sideways, lights on the fuel shed blinking steady. No movement. No threats. No life. But that's the thing about silence. It's not empty. It's waiting. At 1:15, the radio crackled. Not loud. Just a breath of static, like a whisper that wasn't sure it wanted to be heard. I leaned in. The screen blinked. More static. Then, a voice. My name. Silas. Silas. Can you hear me? It wasn't frantic. It wasn't robotic. It sounded familiar in a way that made my stomach knot. Like someone who used to know me, but forgot how to feel it. I froze. My fingers hovered over the dial. Then Rule 2 hit me like a jolt. Unplug the radio if it whispers. No hesitation. No questions. I yanked the cord. The voice died mid-breath. I sat in the quiet afterward, heart pounding, mouth dry. Maybe it was interference. Maybe it was some pre-programmed alert system. Maybe I was tired. But deep down, something colder than the weather pressed against my thoughts. What if the radio wasn't malfunctioning? What if something was using it because it knew I was listening? I checked the rulebook again. Same shaky handwriting. Same underlined marks that looked almost clawed into the page. This wasn't superstition. This was experience. And the worst part, I hadn't even made it to 2A. After the radio went silent, I sat frozen for minutes. Not scared yet, but waiting. Like something inside me knew the night wasn't done testing me. I scanned the monitors. No movement. No glitches. Just snow falling soft as ash and the wind dragging its breath along the metal siding. But there was a weight now. Not in the air in the structure. I stepped away from the control room and wandered the corridor that led to the storage bay. That's when I heard it. A soft thump right above me. Then another. My eyes drifted up toward the ceiling panel near the supply closet. The hatch. I hadn't noticed it before. Probably because I hadn't been looking. But now, I couldn't look away. Something was moving above the station. The sound wasn't random. It had rhythm. Not stomping. Not crawling. Just pacing. Like boots walking slow and steady across the roof in a perfect line. Back and forth. Back and forth. Then 3 knocks. Not hard. Not frantic. Just deliberate. I stepped back, heart hammering, and my hand instinctively touched the rulebook I'd stuffed in my coat pocket. Rule 1. Never open the roof hatch, no matter what you hear. I didn't plan to. But the sound made it hard to think straight. What if someone was trapped up there? What if Voss had forgotten to mention something? What if the knock wasn't asking to come in, but asking to be remembered? I didn't move. I didn't speak. I stared at the hatch like it might blink back at me. Then the knock stopped. Just like that. And in the quiet that followed, I felt something new rise up inside me. Not fear. Not yet. Doubt. The kind of doubt that doesn't go away when the noise stops. What if the station wasn't empty? What if it never had been the next morning? The sun never quite rose. Just a gray smear across the horizon like a bruise behind the clouds. The air was still. Heavy. Like something was pressing down on the station from above. I stepped outside briefly. Just enough to breathe something that didn't come through vents. That's when I saw it. A plate of food. Sitting right by the front entrance. Perfectly placed. Not dropped. Not tossed. Offered. It wasn't mine. I hadn't put it there. Doctor. Voss was still locked away in his quarters, curtains drawn. The plate held something simple: rice, jerky, a cup of rehydrated beans. The steam had long gone cold, but the message was still warm. Something had been fed. I stood over it, waiting for logic to explain it away. A test. A delivery left overnight. A leftover from the past crew. But the snow around it was untouched. No prints. No drag marks. Nothing but the tray, the food, and the silence. Doctor. Voss eventually passed through the main hall, saw me staring at it. He didn't slow down. Just muttered, "Don't touch it. Just leave it." And that was that. No explanation. No context. Just another line in the long list of things you don't question up here. I wanted to press him, to demand answers. But there was something in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. Not fear. Something worse. Familiarity. Like he'd seen it too many times to still be afraid. I stood there for a long while, watching that plate like it might move on its own. Then I stepped back, closed the door behind me, and logged it in the daily report as unexplained item left near threshold. But it wasn't unexplained. Not really. It was Rule 7, and it had just become real. That night, the snow came down heavier than before. Not wild. Not wind-driven. Just straight. Deliberate. Like a curtain being lowered over something I wasn't meant to see. The exterior lights cast faint cones into the whiteness, but they didn't reach far. Visibility dropped to maybe 15 feet, and beyond that, just void. Inside the control room, I monitored the camera feeds like I was supposed to. 6 angles. All quiet. All still. But at 2:07 a.m., camera 3 began to glitch. Not static, something subtler. A shimmer. Like heat mirage on pavement. Except this was sub-zero cold. I leaned closer. Lines bled across the screen. Then movement. Brief. Quick. A figure. Just tall enough to register. Just real enough to hold shape. But there were no footsteps. No tracks in the snow. The figure paused near the fuel shed, then disappeared behind it. I switched cameras. Nothing. I rewound the footage. It was gone. And that's when the pressure in my chest started. Not panic. Not fear. Recognition. I hadn't seen a face. Not clearly. But there was something in the posture. The way it turned. The slight tilt of the head. It moved like me. That same tension in the shoulder. That same forward lean. Like watching yourself in a dream where you've forgotten how to run. I stood up, heart pounding, and glanced at the ceiling, half expecting to hear the hatch again. Nothing. Just that low hum of heat moving through metal. I didn't go outside. I didn't check the shed. I just logged the footage, marked it visual anomaly, and turned off the monitor. But in my gut, I knew what I'd seen. Not an intruder. Not a ghost. A mirror. A question shaped like me, standing in the snow, waiting to be answered. And the scariest part, I wasn't sure anymore if I was the real one watching, or the one being watched. At exactly 3:00 a.m., the station's lights dimmed, not out, just enough to make every surface look older, more worn. The hallway turned to shadow. My breath slowed. That was the hour mentioned in Rule 5. Between 3:00 and 3:33 a.m. Do not leave your room even if the alarm sounds. A strangely specific window of time. But I didn't question it anymore. I closed the control room door and locked it. 3 minutes passed. Then came the knock. Not loud. Not frantic. Just familiar. 3 soft taps against the main entrance. Even through the steel, I could hear the pacing weight behind it. I stood frozen. My eyes moved slowly to the peephole. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I saw a face. Mine. Same sunken eyes. Same furrowed brow. Same winter-burnt cheeks. But the mouth. The mouth was all wrong. It stretched too wide. Too patient. Like it had been smiling far too long. Rule 4. Do not respond to knocks unless you see your own face through the peephole. And even then, be certain it's yours. And I wasn't. The thing behind the door didn't knock again. It didn't move. It just stared. Like it knew I was watching. I backed away slowly, every breath hitching in my throat. I wanted to believe it was hallucination. Fatigue. The isolation. But it didn't feel imagined. It felt placed. As if something had slipped on my skin and wanted me to open the door and welcome it back in. I didn't. I sat down, covered my ears, waited. At 3:09 a.m., the alarms began to scream. Oxygen low. Power failure. Breach warning. Smoke started to leak under the door like fog crawling toward my shoes. My hands trembled on the lock. My instincts screamed, "Get out." But the rule whispered louder. Don't open it. No matter what you hear. At 3:33, everything stopped. Silence returned like nothing had happened. But something had. And it was still out there, wearing my face. By the third night, the cold didn't bother me anymore. Not because it got warmer, but because something colder had already settled inside me. The kind of cold you can't measure with a thermometer. The kind that sets into your thoughts. I drank the same instant coffee, sat in the same chair, watched the same cameras. But now, I watched like a man waiting for a train that had already derailed. I wasn't monitoring, I was bracing. Nothing moved outside, but the stillness didn't feel peaceful. It felt loaded, tense, like the snow itself was holding its breath. You know that feeling when something's about to happen, and the world just waits. That was the station now, waiting with me, or for me. At 2:12 a.m., the lights flickered again, not playful this time, violent. The entire room buzzed like a swarm of hornets inside the walls. I shut my eyes. Rule 3. I didn't count. I didn't breathe. I just waited. When I opened them, the lights had stabilized. But the air wasn't the same. It was heavier, pressed in closer, like the station had shrunk around me without moving a single wall. The hum returned low and slow, like a chant in a language no one was supposed to hear. It came from the vents this time. I turned toward it and froze. Not out of fear, out of confusion. Because the hum was melodic, familiar, like a memory someone else was trying to feed into my head. That was the moment I realized the danger wasn't just outside anymore. It had learned how to get in, not through doors, not through windows, through doubt. After the humming faded, I checked the monitors like I was checking mirrors nervously, half hoping I wouldn't see anything, but terrified I would. The outside feeds were mostly static, blurred snow, weak night vision. But camera 6, the one facing the path that led toward the generator shed, suddenly cleared. And that's when I saw him. A man, standing perfectly still in the snow. No coat, no gloves. Just a gray jumpsuit identical to mine. Skin pale, lips blue, hair soaked and clinging to his cheeks. His arms hung limply at his sides, but his chin was lifted slightly, like he was waiting to be acknowledged. He looked like Dr. Voss. I froze. I had passed Voss's room just an hour ago. He was asleep. I'd heard him snoring. I checked the hallway monitor to confirm. Door still shut. Lights off. Everything as it should be. So who the hell was standing in the snow? I leaned in closer. The man outside hadn't moved an inch, but then he smiled. And the smile, it didn't stop where a smile should stop. It stretched, corner to corner. Too wide, too calm, too old. Like a mask stretching across something that had never smiled before. I didn't grab a flashlight. I didn't grab a coat. I just turned off the monitor. Not out of bravery, out of instinct. Rule 6. Do not shine your flashlight on anything outside. It wasn't about light. It was about attention. It wanted me to see it. It wanted me to react. And I almost did. But I didn't blink. I didn't move. Because something deep in my brain whispered, if you acknowledge it, it remembers you. And it never forgets. At 1:10 a.m., I heard footsteps. Not imagined. Not subtle. Real, deliberate steps on metal flooring. I locked the control room door and shut off the main lights. The hum of the monitors kept buzzing behind me as I crouched under the desk, heart hammering like it wanted to escape my ribs. The steps grew louder, then stopped outside the door, breathing. Close. Human, but not. I didn't look. I didn't speak. I waited. The kind of wait that stretches minutes into years. And then came the whisper from the vent. Silas. Not a question. Not a plea. Just my name. Spoken with the cold clarity of something that shouldn't know how to use it. He's not real. It whispered. None of this is real. You have to wake up. I shut the vent cover slowly, hands shaking. My skin crawled with the kind of instinctive fear no rulebook can prepare you for. But I opened the notebook anyway. I needed something, anything, to anchor myself. And that's when I saw it. A new rule had been added. In red. Crooked handwriting that cut across the page like it had been scratched. Not written. Rule 8. If you see yourself outside the station, lock every door and hide. Do not let it in. I dropped the notebook. Because I had already seen him. The figure near the generator. He wasn't Dr. Voss. He was me. I ran through the halls, locking doors, sealing vents, every muscle tight with adrenaline. It didn't matter that I'd followed the rules. It had seen me. It had warned me. And now it wanted in. I wasn't just being watched anymore. I was being studied, learned. I was becoming a pattern. And deep down, a single thought started to settle like frost behind my eyes. What if I've already let it in and just don't remember? At 1:12 a.m. I saw it. Not on camera. Not in a dream. In the hallway. With my own eyes. There were only 2 doors in the south wing, one leading to the archives, the other to the boiler chamber. I had checked them a dozen times. I knew their shape, their color, their age. But now there was a third, wedged between the two. Seamless metal. No handle. No markings. Frost creeping from the edges like it had grown straight from the wall. I stood there frozen, key in one hand, flashlight in the other, like a child caught staring at something that shouldn't exist. And taped to the center of the door was a note. Just 5 words, scribbled in what looked like pencil, but had the weight of a commandment. Use only if it appears. I didn't want to open it, but I did. The key turned with a soft click, and the door swung open without effort. What lay beyond wasn't part of the station. It was a hallway lined with mirrors, cracked, stained, covered in frost. Each mirror reflected me, but not perfectly. Some blinked when I didn't. Some smiled. One cried. I wasn't looking at reflections. I was looking at fragments. Versions of me that had stayed too long. That had opened the wrong door and never closed it again. At the end of the hallway was another door, wooden, like it belonged to a cabin. Words were carved across it, not painted. Only remember what's true. I opened it. Inside was a room full of objects from my life, personal, irrelevant, impossible. Things I'd lost, things I'd forgotten. My sister's scarf, my childhood backpack. A note in my handwriting I don't remember writing. And in the center, sitting in a chair, was me. Older. Paler. Tired in a way no sleep could fix. He looked up and said, "Took you long enough." He looked like me, but wrong. Skin too pale. Like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. Hands clasped in his lap like someone waiting to be judged. Eyes sunken. Not from lack of sleep, but from remembering too much. I stood in the doorway. The air in the room unmoving. Heavy like a confession. He didn't flinch. He didn't blink. He just smiled. "Do you remember when you stopped feeling safe?" he asked. His voice wasn't identical to mine. It was older. Slower. Like a recording played 1% too slow. I wanted to back away. To run. But my feet didn't move. My body stood still while my mind fractured. He pointed at the scarf in the corner. "Lena wore that the night she died. You folded it. You placed it in her drawer. You never opened it again." My throat locked. I hadn't said her name in years. I hadn't let myself. He stood, and it felt like gravity shifted. "You buried it. But this place dug it back up. I realized then I wasn't just walking through the station anymore. I was walking through a curated version of my own mind, and the rules weren't just for survival, they were containment. For me. The door behind me slammed shut. The mirrors cracked further. The air thinned. My lungs begged. My knees buckled. And then he spoke again. You think you're here because of a job. You're here because something in you wanted to be erased. The room trembled. The dust fell. And then, black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the control room floor. The notebook beside me, flipped to a new page. Rule 9. If you wake up where you don't remember falling asleep, assume the version before you wasn't you. And just like that, I wasn't sure who had walked back into the control room, me, or the one that stayed behind. It started with a tone, barely audible, a low, droning frequency that crept in from the speakers like mold in silence. I thought it was feedback at first, maybe interference from the storm. But the storm had passed. And this sound didn't fade. It sharpened. The pitch shifted at regular intervals, 5 seconds of low drone. Then silence. Then a higher pitch, like something dialing through static, looking for the right listener. I tried muting the system. Didn't work. I tried shutting it off. The controls ignored me. And then the lights dimmed, not just flickering, dimming in sync with the frequency, like the entire station had become a speaker, and something inside it was humming. I backed into the wall, covering my ears. But the sound wasn't just in the room anymore. It was in my head, echoing behind my thoughts, crowding out language, memory, logic. I dropped to my knees. My nose bled. My teeth clenched so hard I thought they'd shatter. A voice, no. A shape began to form in the tone. Not words. Intention. Pressure. Pull. Like something intelligent was embedded in the frequency, and it had finally noticed that I was paying attention. And then it stopped. The silence hit like a wave collapsing in reverse. I gasped, clawed at the desk, and tried to focus my vision. On the monitor, every camera feed now displayed a countdown. 10:34. 10:33. 10:32. 10 minutes. No label, no context, just ticking numbers in red. I looked around the room. No alarms, no motion. Just that countdown. And then my radio, still unplugged, whispered one line through dead static. Don't let it finish. I must have blacked out. One moment, I was staring at the countdown on the screen, just over 7 minutes left. The next, I was waking up on the floor of the kitchen, my head against the linoleum. My fingers curled around a can of powdered coffee I didn't remember picking up. No noise, no lights. No time. I checked my watch. It blinked 3:33, the forbidden window. But something was wrong. The hallway outside the kitchen looked longer than before. The light fixtures weren't buzzing like usual. They were completely silent. The pictures on the wall were no longer of scientific diagrams or equipment logs. They were photos, personal ones. Me and Lena. Our parents. A beach I hadn't seen in 20 years. I had never brought these photos here. And then I smelled its cinnamon. My mother's perfume. Not the idea of it. Not the memory. The real thing. Thick. Sweet. Tangible. It choked the hallway like a fog of nostalgia designed to lure me forward. I moved slow. Every step peeled something away from me. Certainty. Direction. Self. I reached the main hall, and the rules on the wall were gone. In their place, a mirror. Not dusty like before. Clean. Clear. Too clear. I looked in and it wasn't me. It was close. Same hair. Same eyes. But he didn't blink. He didn't follow my movements. His face was waiting. Then he smiled and spoke, but the sound came from behind me. It's okay now. You're almost ready to remember. I turned, but the hallway behind me was gone, replaced by that same endless corridor of mirrors. No walls, no edges, just reflections watching me walk towards something I no longer trusted to be real. And worst of all, part of me didn't want to escape. The radio crackled again. But this time, it wasn't static. It was a voice. Silas. You copy, I froze. That voice belonged to Dr. Mallory. She died 2 winters ago. Avalanche during a field expedition. I went to her memorial. I helped carry her box. But there she was. Clear. Calm. Alive. Silas. Come in. We lost visual on you. Where are you broadcasting from? My hand hovered over the receiver. I knew what every rational instinct screamed, do not engage. But my fingers moved anyway. Like I had no agency left. Like something deeper in me wanted to believe her voice. I pressed the button. Mallory? She sighed, relieved. Thank God. You've been silent for 7 days. 7 days. No. I whispered. It's only been 4 shifts. No, she repeated. You've been missing since the breach. I didn't ask what breach. I didn't ask how she was alive. My voice cracked when I said, Where are you? Her answer came slow, almost careful. We're at the backup site, where they moved the real station after the signal was corrupted. You're not supposed to be on that side anymore. That side. The words landed like ice water poured straight into my chest. What do you mean? This side, I asked. But the radio began to warp. Her voice stretched, slowed until it sounded like she was being pulled away mid-sentence. Just don't follow the light when it calls your name. It's not static. Then silence. The kind that presses on your eardrums, even in total stillness. I stood there staring at the dead radio, realizing something unbearable. The station wasn't abandoned. It was replaced. And I wasn't stationed at Houseion anymore. I was inside whatever was left behind. A copy of a place made for something else to live in. And now it was learning how to talk. The control room door was locked. I remembered locking it. I remembered checking it twice. I even remembered counting the steps it took to get there. A ritual to anchor myself. But when I turned around, it was open. Not ajar. Not broken. Wide open. Swinging slightly like it had been waiting for me to notice. I stepped back. The hallway beyond wasn't dark anymore. It glowed. Soft yellow light. Like hospital corridors in dreams. I heard a voice, childlike, whispering something just out of reach. Come home. The rules didn't say anything about this. I grabbed the notebook, flipped to the last page. There were no rules anymore. Every line had been scribbled out, overwritten by inked spirals, like someone had tried to write the truth but failed halfway through. That's when I realized the rules weren't protecting me from this place. They were protecting this place from me. Something had shifted. The walls weren't where they used to be. The vents whispered at different hours now. Even the clocks no longer agreed on time. I wandered into the medical bay, my reflection followed 5 seconds too late. And in every room I entered, another door appeared. Doors that hadn't existed yesterday. Some led back to places I remembered. Others opened into memories I didn't recognize. And then I saw the worst one, a door labeled my room. I've never lived here. So why did I know what was behind it? Inside the door labeled my room was a place I recognized but shouldn't have. A twin-sized bed with navy blue sheets. A corkboard pinned with old Polaroids. A small metal desk covered in hand-scribbled notes and torn paper. Every object was familiar. Every object was wrong. This wasn't a room I had ever lived in, but it was built entirely out of pieces I'd forgotten. A dream I once had when I was 8. A book I'd owned but lost in high school. A coffee mug I swear I broke in college. Everything inside was reconstructed nostalgia memory arranged like set design. There was a clipboard on the desk. It had my name on it. Subject Silas Gray Protocol. Iterative memory simulation. Batch 19. Status observation mode active. Subject unaware notes. Resets triggered successfully. Emotional divergence increasing. I stopped breathing. The notebook. The rules, my shift logs. It was all scripted. I was following instructions not for survival, but to test behavioral compliance under simulated dread. They're watching to see when I break. I slammed the clipboard down. The walls flickered no, glitched like pixels struggling to hold form. The air smelled like electricity. My skin itched with static. And on the mirror across the room, words appeared. Do you remember who you were before this place? My hands trembled. I couldn't answer. Not because I was scared, because I didn't know. Because maybe I had already broken. Maybe this wasn't the first cycle. Maybe I was batch 19, but not the first Silas. The light bulb above me burst. Sparks rained across the desk. Somewhere down the hall, I heard laughter. Not mocking. Pleased. Like something had just learned something new about me. And liked it. And that's when I knew the experiment wasn't failing. It was working. There was one drawer I hadn't opened. In that artificial room built from my memory scraps. Something about the bottom drawer of the desk pulled at me like a splinter under skin. Too deep to remove, but too painful to ignore. I pulled it open. Inside was a single document. Letterhead Houseion Research and Signal Interference Division. Title Termination Clearance Form. Subject Self-Authorization, below it my name. My handwriting. My signature. I had signed permission to be erased. It didn't make sense. My hand shook as I scanned the paper. Date of authorization, March 11th, 2023. That was the day I started here. The day I arrived. Or the day I was uploaded. This station isn't real. Or maybe it was. Once. But now it's a loop, a broken machine caught replaying echoes of human memory. Feeding on emotional data like oxygen. I signed that paper voluntarily. Why? Because grief makes people desperate. Because memory is the last prison people willingly walk into. Because maybe I was never sent here to work, I came here to forget. But I failed. And the system knew it. The mirror behind me flickered again. My reflection didn't move, didn't mimic. Just stood there watching. And then it spoke. You've seen enough now. You can join the others. Others, I whispered, behind me. Every door in the station creaked open at once. I heard the shuffle of bare feet, the hiss of breath from lungs that hadn't breathed in years. A dozen versions of me, all broken at different stages, all trapped in their own loops. Some were sobbing, some were silent. One was laughing, loud and wrong. I stepped back, clutching the clipboard, looking for escape. But there was no exit. Only the room. Only the signature. Only the decision I had already made. I flipped the page over. On the back, in red ink, the one who reads this last is the one who finishes the program. I looked up, and all the other versions of me stopped moving. They were waiting for me to become the next signature, the next observer. The next sacrifice to the memory loop. My knees gave out. I sat on the floor. Whispering fragments of names I no longer trusted were real. Lena. Voss. Mallory. Myself. And the static returned. Not loud. Just steady. Like applause from something not human, but satisfied. Because it had done what it was designed to do. It didn't need to kill me. It just needed me to forget who I was. I don't remember walking out of the room. I just remember waking up again in the security office. Same chair. Same blinking monitor. As if none of it had happened. As if everything I had seen, the doors, the mirrors, the other versions of me had been wiped clean. Like a reboot. Except one thing had changed. The rule sheet was gone. In its place was a single sticky note. Faded yellow. Handwritten. You passed. Don't read this twice. My fingers trembled as I held it. And that's when I noticed my name badge was missing. In its place, clipped to my chest, was another name, Observer Number 7. No memory of a promotion. No memory of anyone giving it to me. And on the monitors, something new. Every camera showed a different version of me, wandering different parts of the station. One making coffee. One pacing in circles. One standing completely still, staring into a blank wall. It wasn't surveillance anymore. It was a mirror. And the moment I realized that, the feed blinked once, then all screens synced to one camera. Camera 12, storage wing. The live feed showed me sitting in the security chair watching the monitors. But I hadn't moved. I was still in that chair, watching myself watch myself. And I swear to God, the version on the screen smiled. Not a reflection. Not an echo. Just something pretending it still belonged to me. My skin itched. My spine screamed to move. To run. But I didn't. Because if what's on the other side of the glass smiles first, running doesn't matter anymore. I checked the clock. 3:33 a.m. Same as before. I waited. I watched the hands tick. But they didn't. They pulsed. Like a heartbeat. Like something alive was hiding behind the glass. I tore it off the wall. Opened the back. No batteries. No mechanism. Just a circle of mirror glued to the inside, facing inward. Why would a clock reflect itself? I left the office. Walked the perimeter. Everything looked normal, except nothing felt right. The doors weren't creaking anymore. The air vents were silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights had gone mute. The building was breathing. And worse, it was listening. Each step I took echoed too long. My footsteps overlapped, like someone else was walking a second behind me wearing my rhythm, mimicking my weight. When I passed the mess hall, I saw someone sitting inside, back turned. Same uniform, same haircut. I held my breath. The figure didn't move. Until I blinked. And then the chair was empty. I ran. Not from fear, but from recognition. Because that wasn't an intruder. That was the part of me that stayed behind last time. The one I left to keep looping when I woke up. Maybe I never left. Maybe I just shifted chairs. Maybe the simulation doesn't end, it just forgets to tell you when it starts over. That's the worst part of all this. Not the voices, not the false doors, not the rewritten memories. It's the idea that one day, I'll leave this place, go home, smile at someone I love, and they'll smile back. Just a half second too late. Because the version of me that walks out of here might not be me anymore. I don't remember the helicopter ride back, just fragments, The sound of rotors overhead. A medic calling my name. Someone strapping an oxygen mask over my mouth. But when I opened my eyes again, I was home. Clean sheets. Sterile white light. Hospital walls. A window view of mountains that didn't breathe. They said I collapsed from exhaustion. Said they found me alone at Houseion station, malnourished. Dehydrated. Mumbling in loops. They said no one else was there. That I imagined the rest. But something's wrong. The mirrors in my apartment are too clean. Too clear. I cover them at night now. Every digital screen flickers at 3:33 a.m., even when unplugged. I started noticing strange numbers appearing on my receipts. 33, 33, 33.03. Room 3B. Third floor. I don't believe in patterns anymore. Because I know what patterns really are. Traps that feel like coincidence until they're closed around you. I tried talking to someone. My sister. A therapist. They all listened. They all nodded. But they never blinked at the right time. Last night, I woke up to find my bedroom door cracked open. I live alone. But someone had tucked in my sheets. On my desk was a sticky note. Same handwriting. You passed. Don't read this twice. I checked the closet. Inside, an old security uniform. My name stitched across the chest, observer number 8. I burned the note. I threw out the uniform. I unplugged every device. But the hallway light still flickers at 3:33. And I know the simulation isn't finished with me. It just followed me home. Because some doors don't lead out. They lead deeper. And once you've seen behind the glass, you never stop being watched. Nobody warns you about the echoes. They tell you survival is the finish line. But what they never say is that the finish line moves. When I got home, everything was quiet, but not in the comforting way. It was the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring, like something is listening and breathing through the walls. At first, it was little things. My bedroom door creaking open at 3:33 a.m. The TV turning on to static with no remote nearby. My phone vibrating once every night with no missed calls. I convinced myself it was stress, trauma, residue. I tried to normalize the way the lights flickered, or how my reflection seemed a split second behind me in the mirror. Until one night, I woke up standing, barefoot on the kitchen floor, staring at the microwave. It was running. The timer read exactly 3 minutes and 33 seconds. I never touched it. It wasn't even plugged in. I started sleeping with the lights on, locking every door inside my apartment. I taped a line of salt across the threshold, and I began recording myself each night just to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. But the footage made things worse. I never moved. Not once. I just sat upright in bed, eyes open, staring at the wall, for hours, not blinking. And at exactly 3:33 a.m., I stood up, walked to my desk, and began writing in a notebook that didn't exist when I went to bed. Not in English. Not in any language I've ever seen. Symbols, circles, arrows that looped in on themselves. Pages of a new rulebook, written by a version of me that only exists when the world forgets how to count time. I burned the notebook, tossed it into the kitchen sink, and lit a match. But the next morning, it was back. Clean. Unburnt. Open to a new page. And the final entry just said, "It's almost your turn to watch." I haven't slept since. I don't know if I'm awake now or if this is just one more layer of the loop. I keep hearing a voice from the walls, not loud, just consistent, repeating the same question over and over, like a heartbeat with words. Do you remember who you were before the echo answered? And I don't. Not really. Because I think the echo answered for me. Some nights, I sit in the dark and wonder if any of this is real. Not in the philosophical way people talk about over a drink, but in the deeply terrifying sense that maybe what I think is life is just a very good simulation, one I agreed to, signed off on, and then forgot by design. I've tried to reassemble the timeline, trace back what's real and what's a manufactured loop. But the further I dig, the more inconsistencies I find. I called my old coworker Voss last week, just to confirm I had a life before Houseion. He picked up. His voice was cheerful, warm. But when I asked him what we used to work on together, he paused too long, then laughed nervously and said, "I don't think we've met. Man." Wrong number. He said my name before hanging up. I checked my employee records online. Nothing. My credentials didn't exist. My social security number didn't return any tax filings. It was as if my life prior to Houseion was fabricated or erased. And the more I press against the surface of this new world, the more fragile it feels, like wallpaper over a cracked wall. I visited a doctor, had a scan done. They told me my brain had minor scarring consistent with long-term exposure to electromagnetic interference. That was the only thing they could explain. Everything else was normal. But I don't feel normal. I feel observed, studied. Every mirror, every screen, every reflection I pass holds my gaze a second too long. Every time I blink, I half expect not to open my eyes again, but to wake up back at that station, in the chair, in the loop. Because here's the truth that I'm afraid to say out loud but can no longer deny. I don't think I ever left Houseion. I think this version of life is just another layer, a more elaborate test, one designed to see how far the simulation can stretch before I realize I'm still inside. Maybe I am Observer Nur 9 now. Maybe Observer Nur 9 was just the name I gave myself to cope. Maybe the real me, if there ever was one, is buried beneath so many loops that I wouldn't recognize him even if I looked him in the eyes. And I think I already have. In the mirror. Smiling back. Just a second too late. So maybe you're wondering, was any of it real? The station. The loops. The copies of myself. The whispers behind the walls. Maybe you're telling yourself it's just another creepy story on the internet. Just pixels and sound. Nothing to take home with you. Nothing that can reach you through a screen. But that's what I thought, too. Until I started hearing my own voice before I spoke. Until I saw my reflection blink after I did. Until the rules no longer stayed on paper, but followed me home. The scariest stories aren't the ones that end. They're the ones that never confirm they've stopped. And now, you've heard this one. From beginning to end. So if your lights flicker tonight, if the microwave starts on its own, if you wake up standing in a different room than where you fell asleep, don't panic. Don't scream. Just ask yourself one question. Did I just finish watching this? Or did something finish watching me? If that thought stuck with you even for a second, then save this video. Because you might need the rules again someday. And if you've ever seen something out of place, a shadow, a glitch, a voice that wasn't yours, drop it in the comments. Your story might be someone else's warning. And if you want to keep one eye open with us, subscribe. Join the watchers. We're already listening.